and we should be off. All right. So in our last meeting, we introduced some of the relationships involved with beams. And today we're going to go into a little bit more detail in how to look at these relationships between the applied distributed force, the transverse shear force, and the bending moment inside the beam. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and talk about what we should be covering. We're going to talk about how to draw shear and bending moment diagrams, and we're going to use two techniques for this. We're going to look at how you did it back in the past with the equilibrium-based techniques, and then we're also going to look at these differential and integral relationships, which we introduced last time. And as kind of a recall, what we were attempting to do is think about how we can relate the internal transverse shear force to an external distributed load, and also relate internal transverse shear to bending moments. And kind of one of the hopes and ideas here is that, as you look around you in your everyday life, we can begin to think about what's happening inside the structures that we see. I think it's probably more innate that we can understand if I stretch something, then I've got this force that's being applied inside of it. But as we talk today, hopefully this idea of, oh, here's a concentrated force along a beam, like this truck moving along it. And how would it change the distribution of, say, internal bending moment as that truck moves along? And, before that truck even came along that structure, there was some distributed load from the weight of the bridge itself. So this approach, or what we're going to cover today, should hopefully assist in kind of developing some of these fundamental ideas and kind of straining our imagination. So we talked previously about CDL's approach to finding internal forces and moments, or it's a general approach to beam bending problems. And this approach is not to be confused with the three pillars of equilibrium, constitutive relationships, and geometric compatibility, which also comes from CDL. What we're talking about here is essentially an approach to just looking at the equilibrium. And we have three steps. We idealize, or we create the model for the problem. And so one example, and this slide is updated from the last session that we had together. We go ahead and we create a model. We might draw this cantilever beam, as you see here, with a force acting on the end. And then we can also look at the distribution. Well, it's not really distribution, but all the external loads that are on the system and what it looks like. And we perform external equilibrium, which is the next step. And so for that, what are we going to do? We're going to sum the forces, set them equal to 0. And we're going to be able to understand, okay, this reaction R has to be equal to P. We'll sum the moments about a given location, and we'll see that we can calculate what MR might be. And MR here, this reaction moment, is equal to PL. Just a note on the orientation of these external bending moments and external forces that we're applying to the system from constraints. They do not follow a particular convention. It's our decision in terms of how we want to go about drawing them. And typically, when we draw them, just like we've done for the bars and the shafts, what we do is we pick directions that are going to be most likely positive when we calculate the magnitudes. So with this constraint, I could have gone ahead and drawn R to be going downward, and I could have gone ahead and drawn MR to be clockwise, but we did not I did not pick that approach. Instead, what we've chosen here is to try to attempt to come up with an MR and an R that will be positive. Okay, and you can kind of think of, all right, this MR, this reaction moment has to be acting to counteract this moment that's being applied by P over a distance of length L. And this R needs to be opposing P, all right, at least if it's positive, so that we don't have this beam moving vertically or upward or downward. So that's just a note. Of course, when it comes to calculating the internal um, uh, moments and forces, we will there want to follow convention. So that is a different set of situations where we have described in this class using Hibbeler's convention, where if we cover the right side, we're going to have a vertical force going down, and we'll call that V, and we'll have the moment being counterclockwise if we cover the right side. Okay, and when we can go ahead and again use the same second law, right? The sum of the forces is going to be equal to 0, and figure out what V is. And now, something to distinguish, and I maybe wasn't as careful, but we'll definitely be careful today, is that, this V is a function of X. Okay, so when you draw this out, let me just go ahead and add this. All right. This X, all right, is going along the beam. And what we've said in this case, by performing equilibrium, and this is how you did it in statics, we've said, and we're saying that the force, the internal shear force, is going to be constant as a function of X. Now, what I found last time while we were in class is a mistake is the following, is when we sum the moments at a given location, all right, I hadn't, it was incorrect, but this is what it should look like, and this is what we corrected last time. And we see more clearly that this M, all right, the internal bending moment that we're calculating is going to, in fact, be a function of X. And in this case, it's not going to be constant, okay? It will start, right, when X is equal to 0, it starts as PL. And when X goes all the way to L at this side, all right, it's going to be equal to 0, right? That's what we goodness, that's not right either. Oh my goodness. All right, there's a minus sign here. How many times do I have to do this? All right. Yes. So you see here, right? M is equal to minus MR plus XV. All right. And so in this case, when MR is equal to PL and V is equal to P, all right, as we just described here, because it's equal to R and R is equal to P. So anyway, this is the appropriate form. So if we're drawing a bending moment diagram here, right, what we're going to do okay, we're going to pick out our locations such that we can draw a straight line, and this is going to be minus PL, okay? And we have less option here because this is the convention that we've selected and that we've chosen, okay? That we've got to make sure that this sign, if you draw it or I draw it, okay, these graphs need to have the same positives and the same negatives, okay? So it's important, right? And another thing to point out is these negatives and positives here, if you will, they are going to be independent of the directions I selected for my external loads from constraints or otherwise, okay? Any questions on this? Let me take a look in the chat, or I don't see anything in the chat, but are there any questions in the group me? No? Okay. Clear as mud. Great. Okay, so let's take a look at an example, right? And here we're going to try to figure out what the internal shear forces and bending moments would be along a beam. So the first step in this approach to a beam bending problem is to create a model. So here's the model. And it's based on this. I mean, we didn't really have to go say that much more. It says a cantilever beam with distributed loading. Okay, I could have said with distributed loading across it, and I could have said distributed loading in the downward direction. Okay, where we have some constant magnitude for that distributed force, W naught. And the question is, what are the internal shear forces of bending moments along the beam? So at the beginning, we said a few minutes ago that we have two options. We can do this problem either through the equilibrium-based techniques or the integral differential relationships that we've introduced. And this problem, we're going to essentially look at being able to do this with equilibrium, okay? So here we go, external equilibrium. And to be clear, when we do this type of work, uh, it does not exclude this step. Okay, so if you use the differential integral relationships or you use equilibrium, all right, you still need to figure out what's going on with external equilibrium. So once again, we're going to pick our loads from the constraint that we have in what seems to be a logical orientation. So I am applying a distributed force across the beam downward, and that would suggest that we need to have a reaction force R upward. And if we have a load, as we do here, right, there's probably going to be a reaction moment from the wall trying to keep this ball from this beam, beam from rotating downward. Okay, so this reaction moment is going to keep this this omega, this W naught L like it is, all right? And what have we done here? What have we done here? Well, we've gone ahead and we've said that we can create an effective force, okay, W naught, times length that's acting halfway along the beam. This is a very convenient technique to use, especially when we have the opportunity to perform external equilibrium. Now let's run the equations themselves. So for forces in the vertical direction, we can say that we have R minus W naught L is equal to 0. We can say R is equal to W naught L. And for the moments, we have to do it about a location. So what if we do this? This one is done at this location. Okay, I didn't specify, but how do I know that? Well, I know that because there's no R contributing a moment here. So if the only place that could be is if the location of which we're summing is where R is located. So it's located at the left side. And we can also see that this W naught L is contributing in a negative moment. And so that's kind of making the assumption that Z, or the axis of interest, is coming out of the board at us. MR, all right, is going to be positive. Okay, again, following that convention where the direction is coming out of the board. Okay, so we've now solved for MR and R. Internal equilibrium. So once again, we draw another diagram, and we're going to go ahead and take a slice. And this slice is going to be dependent on x. Okay, and um, I'm going to put a point O here. I don't have to do my summation of moments about the location of the slice, but I am choosing to do so. I could have done it here. Either way, it's going to be fine. One advantage that people like about putting this point for summing the moments at the slice's location is that there you do not have to account for the contribution of the shear force, which, while it may be not too difficult in many cases, sometimes it's because the shear force can be a little bit complicated. It's more convenient to just look at the contribution from external forces or other concentrated forces that are distributed, but not the shear force itself. And also, I don't know what the shear force is at this time. We're following the convention again, so V is downward when we cover up the right, and we have M as being counterclockwise when we cover up the right. We can go ahead and sum the forces in the vertical direction, and when we do that, we have the following. So we have R, right, which is coming upward, and well, we know it's W naught L from over here. We have V, which is going downward, okay? And often it's a good idea to, I didn't do this, but in case it's not clear, right, we have Y this way, we have X this way, and then Z is coming out of the board, okay? So we have R minus V minus W naught X is equal to 0, as you see here. We can go ahead and we can solve for V, and we get the following relationship. Okay, so V is going to be this W naught times quantity L minus X, and this quantity is dependent on X. And so when we do the next step, I mean, it's not super nasty, but it just simplifies our life a little bit when we sum the moments to do that about a location where we don't have to accommodate for V. We can draw a diagram to attempt to make this a little bit simpler. And now I want to ask you all a question. All right. What did I do here? What is this term, W naught X times X over 2? What is the meaning of this? Can someone explain, either in the chat or Proj, if you want to open the mic? Does someone want to explain what this term, how we came out with this term? Anyone? It's okay, we can wait a second. Proj, are you there? Am I still broadcasting? Any thoughts where this term comes from? I think my audio is working, but I don't hear anything. Raj, are you there? Uh-oh, maybe we do have a problem. Well, the chat works.
Hello,
Hello?
can you hear us?
Barely, yes. I can barely hear. Let me see if I
Hold
can.
on 1 second.
Yes. Okay, so anyone wanna opine? What's going on here? Okay, there's some some responses in the chat? Okay, so moment due to force. All right.
Hello, Professor.
Okay, what kind of force? Moment due to the resultant distributed force. Yes. So this distributed force, right, is an external load. How how is that coming to be? Well, remember, just like we had a distributed force acting on this region, and we said that the resultant of the distributed force was given as a force halfway across the beam. That is the same principle that is happening here. The resultant force, if we look at it, is which part? It's really just, whoops, that's now got a mind of its own. It's really, this is the resultant force, W naught X. The length of the lever arm, if I'm summing about O, is the distance, the length, X over 2. Okay, so this might be a little bit tricky, but this is something to keep in mind, that as we're moving along the beam, it's actually going to change the contribution of the distributed force. Okay, it's no longer just at the middle of the beam, right? It's at the middle of where, so like, essentially, the effective force is acting there. And as I go further along the slice, it's acting further down. Okay. Any questions about that? I think that's something important to keep in mind as we perform internal equilibrium. So we go ahead and we calculate this moment, all right, the internal moment, that is. As we see here, we're performing the appropriate algebra and a little bit more algebra. So we've put in these terms, and we can maybe simplify things a little bit. And quite frankly, this is probably how I would have proceeded with this problem. If I were in a job interview or something of that nature, I would probably just do the safest thing I could, which is to do the math. All right, assuming that the math, is I can draw a free body diagram, and I can perform equilibrium on the appropriate diagrams. In reality, and what we'll talk about later today, there are techniques that allow us to go directly to drawing the moment and shear force diagrams without having to perform every single integral and perform every single calculation, right? But our kind of intrinsic natures are to first attempt to do just the math and then do the plots. But that's not necessarily the most efficient way to do or perform these calculations. But more on that, more on the opposite perspective, I guess, later. So here we have our plot, or our diagram that we're trying to create for the shear force. And we can look at the equation and say, oh, well, I know that when x is equal to L, I'm just going to have 0, right? And I know when x is equal to 0, I'm going to have it be equal to W naught L. And so, what you probably want to do is go ahead and draw those boundary conditions first. And we'll be talking more about boundary conditions today as well. That allows us to get an idea of at least 2 points that are on whatever the curve might be. And since this is a line, right, this is a first order system, simply drawing the line between those two boundary conditions is all we need to do. And again, a lot of this should be review. If it isn't, I do suggest, taking a look back at your statics. Now, in terms of the bending moment diagram, again, it may be a good idea to take a look at the boundary conditions. and think about, okay, what's happening at x equals 0 and what's happening at x equal L, just to kind of get us started, okay? And so here, if I plug in, essentially uh, x equals 0, right? This goes to 0, this goes to 0, and I'm just left with W naught L squared over 2 with a negative side in front of it. So that's what we see there. And if we plug in x equals L, we will be left with 0, right? This is going to be L squared, essentially minus L squared. There's half of one there, and there's another half over there. And this is a second order system. We're seeing there's a minus x squared term here. And so we're not going to be super precise here, but it's a parabola. So we're just going to draw a curve that looks like that. Okay. So even though we essentially, if the question says, hey, I want the diagrams only, okay, yeah, we need to be able to put a few key points on the diagrams, but we've actually kind of maybe done too much work for ourselves. We've performed it, we've performed an integral exactly, and that's very nice, but as we'll talk and as we've discussed, actually, even the last time we met, it's not always necessary. We might be able to realize that, okay, we're integrating essentially this line, and when you integrate a first order system, right, you're going to get a second order system. And the second derivative of this would have been negative, and so that would have given us a negative curvature. All right. Okay. This problem is going to be on the homework. All right. And I guess I kind of decided that in contrast to maybe what we've done in the past, we'll go ahead and we'll work through it. And in that way, hopefully it'll be more clear how to do these types of problems. So the question is, what is the maximum bending moment along the beam? And here, the configuration is more complex in that we have a distributed load that is only acting halfway across the beam, and it's simply supported, meaning that we have a pin on one end and a roller on the other end. So here are some thoughts to keep in mind. For the external equilibrium and the internal equilibrium, okay, we'll use second law with both forces and moments. All right, that's good. We might want to perform method of sections going from both the left and right sides. It is useful to graph the shear force and bending moments to make sure they are continuous for this particular problem. Okay, so in this problem, okay, and we talked about that might be a little bit obscurish, I guess. But last time we met, we talked about how if you have a concentrated force along a beam, you can have a jump. All right, you can have a jump in the shear force as you move along it. We also talked about if you have a concentrated applied moment, you can have a jump in the moments. And we're going to talk more about this today as well. So it's that may be more of a nuanced point. Right? And taking the derivative of the moment as a function of position is a useful means to find a local maxima. All right, so that's just bringing up an idea that we have from calculus, right? If I have a curve and I'm interested in calculating out what the maxima or minima might be along that curve, I can take a derivative and set it equal to 0. Okay. Oh, I remembered. Okay, I did say that we would let everyone take attendance at the beginning, and I apologize. I think I did not do that. So let me go ahead and let's see. We'll keep that. There it is. Okay, so go ahead. Whoops. No, there it is not. Okay, go ahead and take your selfie if you're in class, or go ahead and take, yeah, go ahead and take a shot of this. okay, for the attendance. Proj, if you could let me know when that's more or less done, then we will be able to proceed. Sorry for that coming later than I promised that it would. And we'll do it again at the end for those who may have missed it.
Professor, we're done.
Is it okay for us to proceed?
Can you hear us, Professor?
Yes.
Yeah, it's done.
It's very, I don't know why it's so quiet. I thought I turned up the volume. But I think you said that it's okay for us to go. I think that's what I got. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed here with this example. And let me just get myself aligned again. So okay, I can see questions or comments that people have in either the group me or the Zoom chat. So here we go. With external equilibrium, we can go ahead and draw the simple reaction forces on each side. And we can draw that we have a concentrated force associated with this W naught. This magnitude, right? That's not the moment. This is the magnitude, right? Because the distributed force is acting across only half of the beam, it's going to be W naught L over 2. And if it's acting, the effective force, the resultant force, is acting at L over 4. We'll go ahead and take the moments about O, which we're going to put right beneath this location, where the effective force, the resultant force from the distributed force is acting. The summation of the forces in the vertical direction, they're going to be equal to 0. And we have that. The summation of the moments at O are going to be equal to 0. And we can see that for this, there are two contributors. Because we selected it right underneath this W naught L over 2, we can see that we have an R1 acting at L over 4. Okay, and if we say that the axis that we're thinking about is coming out of the board, then this R1 L over 4 would be contributing a negative component of moment, and the R2 is going to be contributing a positive moment. And we can perform equilibrium this way, and we can get that the relationship between R1 and R2 is as follows. If we substitute this expression into the upper expression, we can get that R2 will be equal to W naught L over 8, and R1 will be equal to 3 W naught L over 8. Okay. And I guess question, and this should be quick, making sure the chats work. Is this a determinate or an indeterminate problem? So quickly in the chat, determinate or indeterminate? or Proj. If someone in the class has an opinion. Anyone? Yes. Why is that, Leo? Or someone else who might want to chime in? Anyone? Okay. Yes, all right. Well, it's a very good guess. Okay. Um, the reason this problem is determinate is because solely through the use of equilibrium, we're not using constitutive relationships. We're not using, we're not, yeah, we don't have to use constitutive relationships to be able to state what the external loads on the system might be, okay, and what the internal loading is as well. So we have in more math-like terms, right? The number of equations was equal to the number of unknowns. We didn't know what both of these reaction forces were, R1 and R2, but we had one equation from the force equilibrium and one equation from the moment equilibrium that allowed us to be able to figure out what R1 and R2 are. And in fact, not until the very end of the class will we be dealing with indeterminate problems with beam bending, okay? So unlike what we've done in torsion and what we've done in normal loading, where we very quickly worked with problems that were indeterminate, okay, where we had to do more than just rely on equilibrium to be able to solve for the reaction forces. We in the next, I don't know, next few weeks that we're going to be discussing beams, we're going to be looking at determinate problems. If you have any thoughts or comments on that, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I think it's important to realize that there are ways we'll talk about later that are simple to make a determinate problem become indeterminate. One of those ways, for example, would be to add a wall to the left side. Because if we added a wall and we still kept this roller here, if we had a wall on this side, then we would have a reaction force on the left side, and we'd also have a reaction moment on the left side. And when we try to perform our equilibrium, we would still only have two equations, one for the force and one for the moment, and we would not be able to solve. Okay, we will not be able to solve for that situation. So that would be a way to make a determinate problem become indeterminate, and we'd have to use some additional relationships. Okay, but this is a determinate problem. We were able to simply figure out the reaction forces just by using equilibrium. Okay, now let's move on to internal equilibrium. When we cover the left side now, what we are going to have is a slice that has a conventional shear force acting upward and a moment acting clockwise. We're following the convention here. When we do our uh, our calculation for the internal shear force, okay, what do we see? We see V plus R2 has to be equal to 0, so V is equal to minus R2, and we already figured out what R2 was down here, so we plug that in as such. For the moment, okay, uh, we have an option, okay, to choose a location. In this case, the option selected was to choose the slice location. So we have no V involved. And so if we're doing the moment equilibrium, we would have a minus M, okay, plus an X R2 or R2X like you see here. And so that would be allowing us to get to this internal moment as you see here. Uh, if, okay, so this was going from the right side going to the left, okay? Now, that's fine until what? Until we hit the distributed force. That distributed force starts at L over 2 away from the right side. So what we want to do is we want to go from the left side. Okay, hold on. Okay, Michael, let's see. You have a question. Or sorry, I guess it was a private question. That's kind of you. R1. Uh, okay, nope. Okay, rescinded, I think. Yes. Okay, yeah, because I'm confused by your question too. All right, good. All right, thank you for posting a question though. I appreciate it. Um, okay, so now here we go. We're going to say that we have an opportunity to calculate the internal shear force. Okay, and we're using our convention again, where we have the shear force going down and we have a counterclockwise bending moment. Remember, we're going from the left side. And here we do have a distributed force acting. Okay, so now what we can say is like we did previously on that other problem. Remember when I said, hey, what's the W naught X times X over 2? Where is that coming from? Okay, well, we have an effective resultant force from the distributed force, W naught, right, as W naught X. That is just the resultant force. It is acting at a location X from the left side. So we have the opportunity to say, okay, I've got however far, and it's going to, however far over I am, I have a minus W naught X, that's the effective force there, and I have my R1. Okay, which is what we calculated over here. So that's that, and then we can get this result. For the moment, okay, we have that W naught, all right, is acting at a distance X over 2. All right, so it's acting right. We kind of drew it here. And maybe I'll go ahead and just add that this distance here is X over 2, like that, okay? And as we said, the force, the quantity of it is W naught X. The, um, and it's X over 2 from where? Well, depending on how we work the problem, here, okay, we would have the slice being the location where the moment was taken. So we would have this positive M. We'd have plus this positive W naught X. All right, so it's X over 2 from here as well. And we would have this minus R1X, right? And then when you reorganize things, then it came out like this. So we can write the equation for the moment, as you see here, and simplify it a little bit deeper, okay? So we've used equilibrium for this problem, and now let's take a look, okay? Just copying things over, okay? Let's take a look at what we've calculated. All right. Um, we have, this is just from the previous slide. Okay, we have expressions for the left half of the beam, and we have expressions for the right half of the beam. Okay, that might have been missed. Okay, I mean, we said it right, but look, this is the right half calculations. Okay, and this is the left half of the calculations. All right. Um, okay, good question. All right, so why would the positive direction of V be different for each example? Okay, what do we mean? What do you what that's essentially getting to the heart of these conventions. Okay. Uh that question, okay, since we're talking about V and it applies to M as well, okay, that can be thought of by the following simple idea. All right. Maybe it's not so simple, but let's just say that we have a beam, right? Which, in fact, we do. And we take that beam and we take out a chunk on either side, okay? Now, if I've got an internal shear force on this side, okay, by convention, I'm going to draw it downward. And we're going to assume that this is a very slim piece. And by convention, I would draw it upward on that side. Okay. Now, these forces are equal and opposite. Okay. And if so, like imagine now I move this chunk. I move this chunk left or right along the beam. If I move it left or right along the beam, I am going to essentially be replacing this V with this V, right? Depending on which side I'm looking at. Okay. And so the convention allows us to either slice and leave to the left or slice and leave to the right. Okay. And these shear forces are going to be the same, right? It's kind of like if let's say I took this chunk, right? And I took this chunk of the beam, okay? You see that in this, the way I'm defining it there is that, and then the way I'm defining it over here is this. And if you, as we just did, or as we'll do, in order for this to be continuous and for us not to have jumps, all right, between positive and negative, negative, positive, okay, these forces are drawn in opposite directions depending on which way we're going. This is the same thing that we said when we did axial loading. If I have a beam that's axially loaded, like this, with a force, okay, and I take a chunk here, right? My internal, let's just say I'll call Fi, right? It's obviously going to be equal to F. And if I take that same chunk, or I take that same location, but from a chunk going the opposite direction, okay, that internal is just going to be Fi, and it's the opposite direction. Okay, that's a very good question someone asked privately in the chat. Okay. Good. I'm glad you asked that because that is a confusing point. And remember what we said a few minutes ago is that when we eventually draw the bending moment diagrams and the shear force diagrams, if I draw it or you draw it, because we're using the same convention, when I say negative shear force, you're going to say negative shear force. And same thing with the moments. Okay. All right. Let me see how we're doing on time. Oh boy. Okay, let's keep going. We got half an hour. Okay, for the left half, we have these expressions. For the right half, we have those expressions. And here is the attempt, okay, that we have at drawing these diagrams. And again, some of the other techniques we'll talk about very soon allow us to use kind of a slightly different approach where we don't have to do all the math out to do the drawing, okay? But using this internal equilibrium approach followed by, or after an external equilibrium approach, we need to essentially do all the calculations out to be able to do the graphs. Okay. Here we can go ahead and start drawing, all right, from the left. So this is the left half calculation. Okay, you see we have, if we plug in x equals 0, we're going to be at 3/8 W naught L. And then when we get to L over 2, all right, that's the end of when this is good. What do you mean good? Well, that's the end of when these equations are good. Okay, when we get to L over 2, we're going to be at minus W naught L over 8. Similarly, all right, we can draw out that we're going to have a parabola, okay, for the left side, all right, whereas it's not a parabola on the right side when we think about the moments, okay? And so it would look something like this. And there'll be a little bit of insight in a second in terms of why I put a point there, okay? But that's following this equation. When we go to the right side, okay, when we look at the moments, it just becomes a constant and it's flat. And remember, because there's not a concentrated force there, we said that this function has to be continuous. Now, I'm not saying that the first derivative is necessarily continuous, right? We're going from one slope to another slope, right? That can be discontinuous, all right? Um, but we want at this midsection, right? We want that to be equal, and we see that it is, right? And this also goes to the idea of, okay, why do we flip the signs of the V's? Well, we flip the signs of the V's, to be able to make sure that we have alignment if we go from the left or the right, and it becomes clear even at this discontinuity in the applied distributed force. So now we get to L over 2 on the moment diagram, and this is just a line, okay? And we could see, all right, remember, this is another point to make. This is x equals 0 when it's at the right side, okay? So this is going from the right to the left. So it's 0 here, right? And then it gets up to L over 2, and that would make it W naught L squared over 16. That's what this point is right here. Okay. Now, if we want to find the maximum bending moment, that was the question here. Okay. What do we need to do? We need to take the derivative of the moment and set it equal to 0. Well, we have discussed prior that the derivative of the bending moment is equal to the shear force, okay, across the beam. So, I mean, that's great. Okay, that's great. So we have an idea that it's maxing out not in the right half, but in the left half. Okay, from drawing or from however you want to look at it, or you can calculate it out. You could take the derivative of this and try to see if that's equal to 0. That's not really a great exercise to do because this v is just a constant. Okay, so if it's constant, then it's just gonna, it's going to be at the boundary conditions essentially, but one end or the other. But here we have an opportunity to take a look at, when it's equal to 0 and we have a local maxima, right? Because this, we say dm dx is equal to v, and this is the expression that we have. Then we set this equal to 0, okay? And when is it equal to 0? Not when this expression is equal to 0 when x is equal to 3/8 L. So at 3/8 L, we see that we have a peak, and then we can calculate the moment at 3/8 L, and this is going to be the maximum bending moment, right? So this problem is not using our new relationships yet, but it is explaining, I think, and reviewing a little bit of how you go about creating these internal bending moment and shear force diagrams. And hopefully this is a little bit of a refresher for how you can perform this task. Yes, and yes, that's where it's the peak. So the first question in the homework is go ahead and find this maximum bending moment along the beam, and it gives some parameters for the length and distributed force. Okay, second part, running behind. Another approach to constructing shear force, okay, that's a typo, shear force and bending moment diagrams, okay, is to use these derivative or differential and integral forms that we brought up last time, okay? And so dv dx is equal to w, and dm dx is equal to v. Those are the two equations that we're going to be using, and we've discussed, and we actually derived last time. And the methodology is to, again, perform external equilibrium first. Then we're going to calculate the shear forces at the end of the beam, at the ends of the beams, as well as the moments at the ends of the beam. And we talked a little bit of how to do that last time as well. And then we use the differential and integral forms of distributed load shear force relationships to create the shear diagram. And we use the differential and integral forms of the shear force bending moment relationship to create the moment diagram. Okay, so we kind of did this last time, so I'm gonna go breeze through this very quickly. But last time we discussed how we could kind of go either up or down. Okay, so if we're going, from the uh, moment diagram to the shear force diagram, we got to take a derivative of the moment diagram to get the shear force. And if we're going from the shear force diagram to the original problem where it might have some distributed load, again, we take a derivative. If we're going the other direction, if we're going from a problem, right, where they give you some distributed force, right, to a shear force diagram, then we take an integral. And same thing, we go from the shear force diagram to the bending moment diagram, taking another integral. Okay, and so these integral forms are what we end up using more. And these we kind of discussed last time, and I just want to speed through this so that we get to fully understand some examples. Okay, but once again, you're seeing that if you're going from the problem, you're going to create from this problem a shear force and a bending moment diagram. You're going to do the integral technique. Okay, and so let's take a look at a cantilevered beam, all right, with a distributed load, all right, which is well, actually, that's what we've been taking a look at already. We're going to calculate the external equilibrium first, and then we'll use the differential and integral forms to be able to create the plots. So the external equilibrium is pretty straightforward in that we have a reaction moment, and now we're calling it MA, and we have a reaction force. And we kind of did this last time, in fact, but I think I'll share a little bit more details now that we have this second opportunity to complete the problem. We have the effective force, okay, that's going to be equal to W naught L. That's the resultant here. We have, and that's from the distributed load. We have our MA, our reaction, that's going to be equal to the effective force times the distance it's acting from the point where we're considering our moments, which would be at A. So you might write M sub A or M sub O, whatever you pick as your point. And we have our R equals W naught L. At the right, or I'm sorry, at the left end, okay, and we talked about this a little bit, but I think maybe it will be more clear here. At least these drawings will be better than what we discussed last time. We take a slice very close to the left side, okay? So essentially we don't even draw an X here underneath or above, okay? There's no distance. And then we perform equilibrium, okay? So what we're saying is that I now know that the internal shear force, V at X equals 0, if I'm coming from the left, is going to just be equal to R, right? There's no other force acting because the distributed force is not having any material on which it can act. So I didn't even draw it here. I could draw it, but I would be, if I were going, more likely if I had a section that was not just at the left end. This is very important. You might be tempted to say, oh, V of 0 is always going to be equal to R. Well, be very careful here right? If you're dealing with the left end or the right end, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. But you could see that if you were at the right end, your V would be in the same direction as your R if it's going upward, and so it would be equal to negative R. So keep that in mind. Um, the moment at the left side is going to be equal to the reaction moment, but negative. All right, do you see this? Because now we have M as positive plus MA as positive, and so it's going to be equal to minus MA, right? That's what we were getting at with saying, oh, at the right end it could be different. So be very careful here, all right, that you actually do think about the equilibrium. If not, write it out exactly. Okay, I kind of jumped a step here. The values at the right end are going to be as follows. We have, using our convention, V and M as drawn. And we're going to be looking at V now. We'll say if we're going across, this would be V of L. And what do we see here? There's nothing. There's no force vertically, transversely, better said, or transverse direction to this beam here. So it's just going to be equal to 0. And we have also no moment. So that's going to be equal to 0 as well. Okay. Yes, the distributed force is still, going all the way to the end, but because the sliver is so small, we're going to say that it doesn't have any material, no section to act on. When we draw our shear force diagram, okay, we're going to use the integral form of our equation for dv dx is equal to W. So the integral form of dv dx is equal to W is going to say, all right, we take the integral of dv and we take the integral of W dx. Important. By convention, and this is like the one time, maybe you'll find another example, where we do have a definitive convention that applies to an external load. And that is when we are thinking about the distributed force that's being applied, okay? By convention, if it's going downward, the distributed force, that is going to be giving us a minus W naught dx. And it's true, we also have conventions for, I guess maybe this is not the only case, but you also have conventions for concentrated forces and concentrated moments and how they affect the internal bending moment and the internal force. So we can go ahead and we can perform the integration here. And when we do that, what do we get? We get a minus W naught x plus C1. We don't know this value, but now we have some awesomeness here. We have a boundary condition. So we know that at 0, when V of 0 is equal to R, which is equal to W naught L. So what does that mean? That means that C1 is going to be equal to W naught L, just like that, okay? And this integration, I guess, should be more careful. I'm performing this integration as I'm going from left to right, okay? Um, and so that's how we typically think about these equations. So for this diagram, we came up with the exact expression, all right? But did we have to really? We didn't necessarily have to. We could have just said, look, I know what the shear force is at the left side, it's equal to R. I know what the shear force is at the right side, it's equal to 0. And I know that this is a constant distributed force across the beam. So because I know it's a constant distributed force, I could have just said, oh, well, it's some constant. I'm integrating a constant. It's going to be first order. Integral of a constant is going to be a line. And it has to go between these 2 points. So I could have kind of skipped this step and just thought, oh, I got to integrate this constant, and then I'll draw it. Similarly, right, again, I could just draw before we do the math, which I will do, I could just say, hey, I know that at 0, it's minus W naught L squared over 2. And I know at the right side, it's going to just be equal to 0. Okay, so I have this point and I'm integrating a linear expression. So that will give me a quadratic expression, and I would go like this and connect them. But doing the math out, as you see here, we can get an exact expression, but I'm not really going to use that exact expression. I'm just going to say, I know where it starts on this side, and I know it has to get to 0 at x equals L. Okay. And yes, so we can solve for this exact expression algebraically, but if we're just trying to draw it, again, we probably don't need to do that. This approach is in contrast, right, to what we did when we had just the ability to do internal equilibrium. And it can be faster in some cases. That might be complicated. Okay, so here's the second question on the assignment. Now we have a distributed force across a beam that's simply supported. Okay, this other one, right, was a distributed force across a cantilever beam. Okay, and so here, very quickly, we will perform external equilibrium. And symmetry allows us to say that RL is equal RR. This is not that big a deal if you really want to calculate it out, though. It's not just symmetry. It's like if I take my point of interest right below or right at the middle, right, I'm going to have one contribution a moment, RL times L over 2, and I'm going to have another contribution a moment, RL times L over 2, right? Those L over 2s are going to cancel out, and so I'm going to get RL is equal to RR. Okay? So how did we approach this problem? We approach this problem by, again, first doing external equilibrium. And when we do that, we can solve out for what the RL and RR will be. When we look at attempting to use these new equations, we're going to think about what the values at the left and the right side of the beam are. So this is going to be our, we'll call it internal VL and our internal ML. Okay, so looking at the left side, we can say that at the left side, we have that the shear force is equal to W naught L over 2. On the right side, we can say that our internal force, shear force, is going to be equal to minus R. Okay, you see that? Because they're going in the same direction, so it has to be the opposite. So it's going to be minus W naught L over 2. At the left side, there's no moment being applied from this pin, so that's nice and easy. And the same from the right side, there's no moment applied at the pin. Okay, so whenever you see pins at the left and right sides, you're like, yes, I don't have to think about the internal. I know that the internal bending moment right at those pins is going to be equal to 0. We can take our minus W naught, okay, that we have here, and we can integrate it. We note that since this is a constant, once again, this is going to be some type of line. And look, we already know that we have what we have at the left side. We know what we have at the right side. So, I mean, I don't have to do all this math. We can, okay, but I know that it's going to go from the left side, being at W naught L over 2, to the right side at minus W naught L over 2, just because this is a constant and I'm taking the integral of a constant, which gives me first order. For the dm dx, right, we also know, okay, this is a first order expression, okay, and so when we integrate it out, we're going to get a second order. We're going to get some type of parabolic expression. So we can do the integration out, or we can once again say, hey, this is got to start at 0 and it's got to end at 0 somehow. And if I look at this this expression and I were to look at the area, I'd say, oh, you know, as I'm integrating underneath here, it's getting higher and higher. It's gonna increase. And then when I get to this point and I go down, it's going to get lower and lower. So it's going to go up and it's going to come down. Okay, again, I can do the math out, but I've got essentially a parabola that looks just like that. And if we're trying to find the maximum, where is it going to be maximum? It's going to be maximum when this v is equal to 0, right? We just said that. So that's dm dx, right? That's the v, right? That's when it's equal to 0. We can solve for that, and we can plug it into our equation. So that's one useful thing of this equation, right, that we integrated out, is that we can actually calculate a number, and that's what we get for the maximum bending moment. Okay. All right. So that's question number 2. We discussed briefly last time, okay, how the internal shear force depends on an applied force. We actually derived it, and it's a jump. We also described how it is the internal bending moment is affected by a concentrated applied moment, as you see here. And it's going to be another jump. It's going to be instead delta M is equal to MF. And as we discussed in class, this looks a little strange because it's negative. Okay. So what happens when you encounter a concentrated force? Okay. Well, when you do, okay, this is just the derivation. All right, we get, and we did this last time, we get no change in bending moment, and we get a change in the internal shear force. Okay. When you have a region of a coupled moment, all right, we discussed this last time as well, but these slides are a little bit better. And it's a shame that I go through them so quickly because I'm fighting the clock, all right, because I really want to make sure that you have what you need for the last problem on the assignment. We get that there's going to be this small contribution of V delta X, and it's really just M at. Okay. So those are the two things that you deal with when you have an internal bending moment, okay? Or when you have an applied bending moment and when you have an applied force, how they affect, okay? Now, what do? We're going to handle, all right, the applied concentrated force or concentrated moment at the middle by first performing external equilibrium and looking at what we get for our reaction force at each end of the beam. Okay, and when we look at the internals at the left and the right side, as we see here, we are able to calculate out what the internal shear force will be and what the internal bending moment will be at the left side, and we're able to calculate what the internal shear force and the internal bending moment will be at the right side as well. Okay, and we get this. Now, is there a shear force applied here? No, there's not. I mean, sorry, is there a distributed force applied across this beam? That's what I meant to say. No. So the integral of 0, right, is going to be a constant essentially, right? And so as we move across, okay, we're just going to see that it stays a constant, right? So that's one of the, again, we didn't have to do all the math. We just kind of knew integral of no distributed force is going to be constant. And luckily, all right, this is we know what the shear force is on the left and the right side, and that's what we get as we move across. The bending moment, all right, is going to be the integral of the shear force. And this is first order. So just like we had in the previous problem, when we had a constant distributed force, we got a linear uh, uh, shear force. This is kind of going one step back. It's a constant shear force, and now we're going to get a linear bending moment. But, and this is an interesting thing, there is a applied moment. So here, as we're moving along, we see that going from left to right, we see that there is a slope, okay, of this line. We have a minus m naught over L. So at L over 2, that m naught x over L, sorry, that's the slope of minus m naught over L times x, right? So at L over 2, it becomes that. This concentrated moment is applied in the direction that's going to cause a positive jump in the m. When we get to that midpoint, the moment jumps, all right, from this expression that we have here. It jumps up. That's fine. And we have that discontinuity in the moment. But guess what? The slope has to stay the same. All right, the returning slope, right? The slope of this bending moment has not changed. So it's going to go, and we know at the right side, the bending moment has to be equal to 0. So then it comes back down with the same slope that we had here. Okay. Any questions on this? But this is an interesting point, right? That we can have a jump in the moment, but there's no discontinuity in the force. The homework problem is the following. Here is a simply supported beam that has both an applied force and a applied bending moment, or not bending, applied moment, okay, at a location. And notice that that moment, okay, is acting in the opposite direction, which means that it's going to be, the delta M is going to be negative, all right, as you go from left to right. Notice if you go from right to left, then a negative jump, if you're going from left to right, would become a positive jump. Okay. And I guess I will have to create another video. I thought I could get away without creating another video, but I will go ahead and create a video to describe how to do this problem so that you have some additional assistance. This problem is not trivial, and I think it's worth keeping in mind. Okay, so to kind of conclude for today, and this is the problem that's in the homework. All right, it's saying, hey, this is the geometry. Here's some numbers, and we want to consider what the maximum bending moment is along the beam. Okay, so I'll create another video for that. Today, what we were hoping to accomplish was to strengthen our understanding for how to draw shear and moment, shear force and bending moment diagrams. We use two techniques. We use purely equilibrium, and then we also use differential and integral relationships. And these integral and differential relationships, the big ones are dv dx equals w and dm dx equals v. And hopefully, we are developing our X-ray vision to be able to see what the internal bending moments and what the internal shear forces might be along a beam as we encounter them in our everyday lives. Okay, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and post. Again, this is what you want to show. You know, if you came in late for your attendance, go ahead and post this. And if you have any questions, I can stick around for a few minutes. All right, but I'll go ahead and mute myself and I'll shut off my screen.
Professor,
Yes, Raj.
yeah, I think everyone's done.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll go ahead and log out. Thank you very much. I can hear you very clearly now. I don't know why I couldn't hear you clearly
I
before.
joined from my phone.
Okay, that's why. Great. Thank you.
See you,
Bye-bye.
Professor.